The pounding of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Tabitha Owens raced toward the town of Silvercliff, her heart hammering against her ribs, not from the exertion but from the dread of what awaited her. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild enough to swallow a woman whole if she showed any sign of weakness. Her fingers clutched the reins tighter as she urged her tired mare forward. 6 months ago, she'd been the respectable daughter of a Boston merchant. Now, she was penniless, orphaned, and heading to a mining town where her only remaining relative and uncle she barely knew supposedly lived. The first sight of Silvercliff made her breath catch. Unlike the proper brick buildings of Boston, this town looked thrown together, wooden structures sprouting haphazardly from the dirt, with the imposing mountains as a backdrop. Men with weathered faces and hard eyes turned to watch her ride in, their gazes lingering too long on the lone woman traveler. Tabitha straightened her spine despite her exhaustion. Her once fine traveling dress was now stained and worn, and her shoes, the sturdy walking boots her father had given her before his passing, were cracked and patched, the leather worn thin at the heels and toes. She dismounted in front of what appeared to be the town's main establishment, the Silver Dollar Saloon. A group of well-dressed women standing nearby gave her appearance a critical once-over, their eyes settling on her footwear with undisguised disdain. "Would you look at those boots?" one woman whispered loudly enough for Tabitha to hear. "Looks like she walked all the way from the Atlantic." Another tittered behind her gloved hand. "More like she robbed a grave for those ancient things." Tabitha's cheeks burned with humiliation. These were the shoes her father had bought her, the last gift she had from him. She'd repaired them countless times during her journey west, refusing to part with them even when a trader had offered her a new pair in exchange for her mother's silver brooch. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the women despite their sneers. "I'm looking for James Owens. He's my uncle." The tallest of the group looked her up and down, her painted lips pursed. "Old man Owens. He's been dead these past 8 months. Fever took him." The news hit Tabitha like a physical blow. Her uncle, her last hope for shelter and support, was gone. Her vision swam, and she reached for the hitching post to steady herself. "Looks like those old shoes will have to carry you right back where you came from," another woman remarked, prompting more cruel laughter. "Those shoes," came a deep voice from behind her, "look like they've traveled a harder road than any of you fine ladies could imagine." Tabitha turned to see a tall man dismounting from a chestnut stallion. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, a blue cotton shirt, dark vest, and faded denims. The badge pinned to his vest caught the afternoon sun. "The ladies' shoes aren't for your amusement," he continued, his eyes a startling shade of blue against his tanned skin fixed on the group of women. "She walks the path of my heart, showing more courage in those worn soles than I've seen in most men around these parts." The women fell silent, their expressions shifting from mockery to caution. "Sheriff," one of them acknowledged stiffly before they retreated into the nearest shop. The man turned to Tabitha, removing his hat to reveal sandy brown hair. "Sheriff Asher Blackburn, madam. Don't mind them. New folks are always a curiosity in Silvercliff." "Tabitha Owens," she replied, fighting back tears. "I've just learned my uncle is dead. I've come all this way for nothing." Sheriff Blackburn's expression softened. "James Owens was your uncle. He was a good man. I'm sorry for your loss." He glanced at her tired mare. "You look like you could use a meal and a place to rest. The boarding house down the street is run by a decent woman. I can take you there if you'd like." Tabitha hesitated, acutely aware of her nearly empty coin purse. "I'm afraid I don't have much money left." "Let's get you settled first," he said. "We can figure out the rest later." That evening, after a hot meal and a bath at Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, Tabitha sat on the edge of her rented bed, examining her beloved boots. The leather was beyond repair in several places. She'd need new shoes soon, but the thought of parting with these last reminders of her father brought fresh tears to her eyes. A knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Peterson stood there, a kind but practical woman in her 50s. "Sheriff Blackburn asked me to give you this," she said, handing Tabitha an envelope. Inside was a letter and several bandnotes. The letter was brief. "Miss Owens, your uncle left something in my safekeeping. Please meet me at my office tomorrow morning. Sheriff A. Blackburn." The next morning, Tabitha made her way to the sheriff's office, her patched boots drawing fewer stares now that she wore a clean dress borrowed from Mrs. Peterson. She found Sheriff Blackburn at his desk, reviewing wanted posters. He stood when she entered. "Miss Owens, I'm glad you came. Your note mentioned my uncle left something with you." Asher nodded, moving to a cabinet behind his desk. He withdrew a wooden box and a folded document. "Your uncle knew he was ill. He asked me to hold these for any family that might come looking for him." The box contained a small leather pouch of gold dust and nuggets, a gold pocket watch, and a deed to a parcel of land just outside town. "He had a small claim up in the hills," Asher explained. "Never struck it rich, but he found enough to buy that plot and build a cabin. It's yours now." Tabitha stared at the items, overwhelmed. "I don't know the first thing about mining or living in the wilderness. The land's good for more than mining. It's got water and decent soil, could be farmed." His eyes met hers. "I know it's not what you expected, but it's a start." Over the next few days, Sheriff Blackburn helped Tabitha get acquainted with Silvercliff. He introduced her to the town's shopkeepers, the doctor, and the banker. Most were welcoming, though the women who had mocked her remained cool in their greetings. When Asher took her to see her uncle's land, Tabitha was surprised by its beauty. The cabin was small but solid, situated on a rise overlooking a stream, with the mountains rising majestically in the distance. The inside was dusty and sparse but intact. "It's more than I dared hope for," she admitted, running her hand along the rough-hewn table her uncle had crafted. "It needs some work," Asher observed, examining a leak in the roof. "But nothing that can't be fixed." True to his word, Asher helped her make the cabin habitable. He repaired the roof, fixed the broken door, and showed her how to use the wood stove. Each evening, after his duties as sheriff were complete, he'd ride out to check on her progress. Tabitha, determined to make a life for herself, started planting vegetables from seeds Mrs. Peterson had given her. She traded some of her uncle's gold for chickens and learned to gather eggs without getting pecked. She even began to sell fresh eggs and vegetables in town, earning a modest income. One afternoon, about a month after her arrival, Tabitha was tending her garden when she heard riders approaching. She straightened, wiping soil from her hands, to find 3 men she didn't recognize reining in their horses at her fence. "Well, look here," the leader said, a thin man with a pockmarked face. "Old Man Owens' place has a new occupant, and a pretty one at that." Tabitha reached for the rifle Asher had insisted she keep nearby. "This is private property, gentlemen." The men exchanged amused glances. "We're just being neighborly," Pockmark said. "Name's Vince Holloway. These are my brothers Emmett and Lawrence. We own the land to the north." She'd heard of the Holloways from Asher. Cattle rustlers, suspected of several thefts but never caught. "Thank you for the welcome," Tabitha said firmly. "But I have work to do." Vince dismounted, ignoring her dismissal. "Word is you're planning to farm this land." "That's a lot of work for a woman alone." "I manage, see, that's the thing." He stepped closer. "This valley's cattle country. Farms and ranches don't mix well. Water rights get complicated." "My uncle seemed to manage just fine," she countered. Your uncle was a stubborn old fool who knew when to keep his head down. Vince's smile didn't reach his eyes. Pretty girl like you should find a husband to look after her interests. I might be willing. Tabitha's grip tightened on the rifle. I'm not interested in marriage, Mr. Holloway. Think about it, he insisted. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to your crops or your chickens. The threat hung in the air as the Holloways rode off, leaving Tabitha shaken. That evening, when Asher arrived with supplies from town, she told him about the encounter. His jaw tightened. The Holloways have been trying to control all the water access in this part of the valley. Your uncle's land has the best stream for miles. They threatened me, Tabitha said. Not directly, but the implication was clear. I'll have a word with them, Asher promised. But in the meantime, keep that rifle close. As days passed, Tabitha continued to improve her homestead, but the Holloways' threat weighed on her mind. She began to notice small things: a fence post knocked down, chicken feed scattered, signs that someone had been on her property while she was in town. One morning, she woke to find 2 of her chickens missing. Tracks in the dirt suggested they hadn't simply wandered off. The message was clear. The Holloways were escalating their intimidation. When she reported the theft to Asher, his normally calm demeanor darkened. They're testing boundaries, he said. I'll ride out to their place today. Be careful, she urged, surprising herself with the depth of her concern for him. Over the past weeks, Asher had become more than just her ally. He was becoming someone she looked forward to seeing each day. His visits were no longer just about checking on her welfare. They lingered over coffee, sharing stories of their lives before Silvercliff. She learned he'd been a Union soldier during the war, too young to fight until the final year, but old enough to see horrors that still haunted him. After the war, he drifted west, seeking purpose, eventually finding it as a lawman. In turn, she told him about her life in Boston, her father's shipping business that had failed after his death, leaving her with nothing but debts, and the knowledge that she had an uncle somewhere in the Colorado Territory. The evening after Asher confronted the Holloways, he returned to her cabin, his expression grim. They denied everything, of course, but I made it clear that any more trouble would have consequences. Will that stop them? Tabitha asked. For a while, maybe. He sat heavily at her table. The real problem is that they've got friends on the town council. They're pressing to have water rights renegotiated for the entire valley. Can they do that? They're trying. There's a town meeting next week. He looked up at her. You should be there to speak for your land. The prospect of facing the town council, including those women who had mocked her arrival, was daunting, but Tabitha nodded. I'll be there. On the day of the meeting, Tabitha dressed in her best clothes, a blue calico dress she'd altered from one of Mrs. Peterson's cast-offs. Her old boots, despite her efforts to polish and repair them, still looked woefully out of place with the outfit, but they were all she had. The town hall was packed when she arrived. She felt the stares as she made her way to an empty seat, heard the whispers about that Owens woman and her pitiful shoes. Asher, seated at the front in his official capacity, caught her eye and gave her an encouraging nod. The meeting proceeded through various town matters before reaching the issue of water rights. Vince Holloway stood to present his case, arguing smoothly that the current arrangement was inefficient and that consolidated management by him, naturally, would benefit everyone. When it came time for objections, Tabitha rose, ignoring the murmurs that rippled through the crowd. My name is Tabitha Owens, she began, her voice steadier than she felt. I inherited my uncle's land, which includes access to Silver Creek. The Holloways claim this is about efficiency, but it's really about control, Vince interrupted. Miss Owens is new here. She doesn't understand how things work in the West. I understand enough, she countered. I understand that my uncle worked that land for years without issue, until the Holloways decided they wanted it. I understand that since I arrived, I've faced threats and theft designed to drive me away. This caused a stir among the townspeople. That's a serious accusation, Mayor Thompson said from his seat at the council table. It's the truth, Tabitha insisted. Sheriff Blackburn can confirm I've reported these incidents. All eyes turned to Asher, who nodded. Miss Owens has indeed filed reports of trespassing and theft. The investigation is ongoing. The discussion grew heated, with other small landowners rising to support Tabitha's position, revealing that they too had faced pressure from the Holloways. By the meeting's end, the council voted to maintain the existing water rights, at least until a more thorough study could be conducted. As people filed out, Vince Holloway brushed past Tabitha, murmuring, "You'll regret this," before disappearing into the crowd. Outside the town hall, several women approached her, the same ones who had mocked her upon her arrival. Their leader, whom Tabitha now knew as Margaret Tompkins, wife of the general store owner, gave her a calculating look. "You've stirred up quite the hornet's nest, Miss Owens," Margaret said. "The Holloways aren't known for their forgiveness." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Tabitha replied, "just to be left in peace. Peace comes at a price in Silvercliff." Margaret glanced down at Tabitha's worn boots. "Though I see you're accustomed to making do with less." The other women tittered, but Tabitha refused to be baited. "These shoes have carried me across half a continent, Mrs. Tompkins. They may not be pretty, but they're sturdy like the people who survive out here." Before Margaret could respond, Asher appeared at Tabitha's side. "Evening, ladies," he said, tipping his hat. "Miss Owens, may I escort you home? It's getting dark." The ride back to her cabin was quiet, both of them lost in thought about the confrontation with the Holloways. "They won't give up," Tabitha finally said as they approached her property. "No, they won't," Asher agreed. "But neither will we." His use of "we" warmed something inside her, a feeling that had been growing steadily since she'd met him. In the soft evening light, she studied his profile: the straight nose, the firm jaw softened slightly by his short beard, the lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled. As if sensing her gaze, he turned to her. "What? Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." His expression softened. "I haven't done much. You've been my only friend in Silvercliff. That means everything to me." They reached her cabin just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. Asher insisted on checking the property before leaving, a routine they'd established since the Holloways' threats began. "All clear," he reported, returning to where she waited on the porch. "I'll be back tomorrow." Tabitha nodded, suddenly reluctant for him to leave. "Asher," she said as he turned to go, "why did you help me that first day? When those women were mocking my shoes?" He paused, considering. "I saw something in you," he finally said, "a kind of strength that has nothing to do with guns or fists. The kind that keeps going when there's no good reason to, just because giving up isn't an option." His words touched her deeply. "Good night, Sheriff Blackburn. Good night, Miss Owens." He mounted his horse but hesitated. "Tabitha, be extra careful tomorrow." "The Holloways won't wait long to respond." His warning proved prescient. The next morning, Tabitha woke to find her vegetable garden trampled, the young plants crushed beyond saving. This time, the perpetrators hadn't bothered to hide their tracks. 3 sets of hoofprints led clearly from the Holloway property to hers. Fighting tears of frustration, she hitched her mare to the wagon and drove into town to report the vandalism. Asher wasn't at his office, so she left a message with his deputy and continued to the general store to purchase more seeds. Mrs. Tompkins was behind the counter, her smile thin and insincere. "Miss Owens, what can I help you with today?" "I need vegetable seeds," Tabitha said. "As many varieties as you have. Planting a bit late in the season, aren't you?" "I'm replanting. Someone destroyed my garden last night." Mrs. Tompkins raised an eyebrow. "How unfortunate, though I did warn you about making enemies of the Holloways." "I haven't made enemies of anyone," Tabitha replied. "They chose to become mine when they decided to steal what rightfully belongs to me." As Mrs. Tompkins gathered the seeds, Tabitha noticed a pair of women's work boots on display. They were sturdy and practical, exactly what she needed, but the price tag made her wince. "Those just came in on the last supply wagon," Mrs. Tompkins said, following her gaze. "Quality leather. Not that you could afford them." Tabitha turned away from the boots, focusing on counting out coins for the seeds. She wouldn't give Mrs. Tompkins the satisfaction of seeing how much she needed those boots. Outside the store, she nearly collided with Asher, who was striding purposefully down the boardwalk. "Tabitha," he said, steadying her, "I just heard about your garden. I was on my way to find you." "I left a report with your deputy," she said, "but we both know who did it." His expression was grim. "I'm riding out to the Holloway place right now. I want you to stay in town until I get back." "I need to replant my garden," she protested. "It can wait one day," he insisted. "Please, Tabitha, I have a bad feeling about this." Something in his tone made her agree. She spent the day helping Mrs. Peterson with chores at the boarding house, grateful for the older woman's kindness and lack of judgment. Evening came with no sign of Asher. As darkness fell, Tabitha grew increasingly worried. When the clock struck 9 and he still hadn't returned, she approached Deputy Wilson. "How long does it take to ride to the Holloway Ranch?" she asked. "Hour each way," he replied. "Sheriff should have been back by now. Shouldn't you go look for him?" The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff said to stay put, watch the town." "Then I'll go," Tabitha decided. "Madam, that's not a good idea." But she was already heading for the livery stable. 10 minutes later, she was riding toward the Holloway Ranch, a borrowed lantern lighting her way, the deputy's reluctant directions guiding her. The night was clear, a nearly full moon providing additional light as she followed the main trail north out of town. She'd been riding for almost an hour when she spotted a horse grazing freely by the side of the road. Asher's chestnut stallion. Heart pounding, she dismounted and approached the animal. There was no sign of Asher, but the horse seemed uninjured. She secured both horses to a nearby tree and continued on foot, following what appeared to be drag marks in the dirt. The trail led her to a shallow ravine where she found Asher lying motionless on the ground. For a terrible moment, she thought he was dead, but then she saw the slight rise and fall of his chest. "Asher," she whispered, kneeling beside him. His face was bruised, a cut above his eye bleeding freely. He stirred at her touch, eyes fluttering open. "Tabitha," he croaked. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you," she said, relief making her voice shake. "What happened?" "Holloway's," he managed. "Ambushed me 3-1. She helped him sit up, checking for more serious injuries. "Can you ride?" He nodded grimly. "They took my gun. Said next time they'd take more than that." With considerable effort, they made it back to the horses. Asher insisted on riding himself, though Tabitha could see the pain in his face with every movement. They rode slowly back to town, reaching Silvercliff well after midnight. Dr. Morgan, roused from his bed, confirmed that Asher had no broken bones, just severe bruising and the cut above his eye which required several stitches. "You're lucky, Sheriff," the doctor said. "Rest for a few days." But Asher was in no mood for rest. As soon as the doctor left, he began pulling on his boots. "I need to go back out there, arrest them." "Not tonight," Tabitha insisted, "and not alone. The longer I wait, the more prepared they'll be." They're already prepared. They're waiting for you to do exactly this charge and angry and outnumbered. She placed her hand on his arm. Please, Asher, we need a better plan. The fight seemed to drain out of him. You're right, he admitted, but I can't let them think they've won. They haven't won, she assured him. We just need to be smarter than they are. The next morning, word of the sheriff's attack spread quickly through town. To Tabitha's surprise, it galvanized support among the townspeople, many of whom had suffered the Holloway's bullying in silence for years. A group of ranchers and miners gathered at the sheriff's office, offering to form a posse to arrest the Holloways. Even Mrs. Tompkins's husband offered assistance, providing ammunition from his store at no charge. Asher, still moving stiffly but determined, organized a group of 10 men to ride out to the Holloway ranch. Miss Owens will stay here, he instructed. Deputy Wilson, you're responsible for her safety. Tabitha wanted to protest but understood the wisdom of staying behind. As the posse prepared to leave, she approached Asher. Be careful, she said, echoing his words to her days earlier. His expression softened. I will. He hesitated, then added quietly, I have something to come back for. The posse returned that evening with all 3 Holloway brothers in custody. The arrest hadn't come without resistance. 2 of the posse members sported minor injuries, and Emmett Holloway had a broken arm, but the brothers were now locked securely in the town jail. They'll stand trial for assault on a law officer, Asher told Tabitha as they sat on the porch of her cabin the next evening, and for the vandalism of your property. With all the witnesses coming forward about their other misdeeds, they'll likely be sent to the territorial prison for a good long while. Tabitha nodded, relief washing over her. What about their land? It'll probably be auctioned to cover their debts. They've been borrowing against it for years. He looked out at her property, the newly replanted garden visible in the fading light. You might consider expanding your farm. That's more land than I could manage alone, she admitted. Asher was quiet for a moment. You might not have to manage it alone. Her heart skipped a beat at his words, but before she could respond, he stood abruptly. I should go, it's getting late. Asher, she said, rising to stand beside him. What did you mean by that? He looked down at her, his expression conflicted. I shouldn't have said anything. It's too soon. Too soon for what? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his nervousness. For me to tell you that I've fallen in love with you. The words hung in the air between them, and Tabitha felt her breath catch. Why would it be too soon for that? You've only been in Silvercliff a few months. You're still establishing yourself here. The last thing you need is someone who believes in me, she interrupted. Someone who defended me when everyone else mocked me. Someone who makes me feel like I belong here. She took a step closer to him. Because that's exactly what I need, Asher. His eyes searched hers. Tabitha, are you saying I'm saying that I love you too? The words felt right, natural, as if she'd been waiting to say them for weeks. He cupped her face gently in his hands. I've wanted to tell you since that first day. When I saw you standing there, so brave despite everything, I knew you were someone special. Even with my old shoes, she teased softly. Especially with those shoes, he smiled. They told me everything I needed to know about you, that you're practical, resilient, and sentimental in all the right ways. Then he kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as she responded. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Asher rested his forehead against hers. I want to build a life with you, Tabitha Owens, if you'll have me. I will, she whispered, on one condition. Name it. That we face whatever comes next together, equal partners. His smile was answer enough. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day, Tabitha stood in the bedroom of what was now their cabin, adding the finishing touches to her wedding dress. The simple white gown, sewn by her own hands with fabric bought from Mrs. Tompkins, who had become unexpectedly friendly since the Holloway's arrest, was the finest thing she'd owned since leaving Boston. On the bed lay a wrapped package that had been delivered that morning, a wedding gift from Asher, with instructions not to open it until he arrived to escort her to the church. Unable to resist, she untied the string and pulled back the brown paper to reveal a pair of boots, not just any boots, but the finest ladies' boots she'd ever seen. The leather was butter soft, the stitching perfect, with delicate feminine details that somehow didn't compromise their practicality. A note tucked inside read, "For the woman who walks the path of my heart, these may carry you forward, but never forget the shoes that brought you to me. All my love, Asher." Tears welled in her eyes as she slipped them on. They fit perfectly. She had kept her old boots, of course, storing them carefully in a trunk as a reminder of her journey. A knock at the door announced Asher's arrival. When she opened it, the look on his face at the sight of her in her wedding dress was worth every hardship she'd endured to reach this moment. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice husky with emotion. She twirled, showing off the new boots. "They're perfect, thank you." "Ready to become Mrs. Blackburn?" he asked, offering his arm. "More than ready," she replied, taking it. The entire town turned out for the wedding, even those who had once mocked her arrival. As they exchanged vows in the small church, Tabitha thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the struggle, the fear, and finally, the love that had made it all worthwhile. Later, at the celebration in the town hall, Mrs. Tompkins approached the newlyweds. "I owe you an apology, Mrs. Blackburn," she said, using Tabitha's new name. "I misjudged you when you first arrived." "We all make mistakes," Tabitha replied graciously. "Those new boots suit you, Mrs. Tompkins added, "though I must admit, there was something admirable about how you wore those old ones with such dignity." Asher's arm tightened around Tabitha's waist. "My wife," he said proudly, "understands that true worth isn't measured by appearances." As they danced under the glow of lantern light, surrounded by the community that had become their family, Tabitha knew she had found her home not just in Silvercliff or in the cabin they shared, but in Asher's steadfast heart. "What are you thinking?" he murmured as they swayed to the music. "That sometimes the longest journeys lead us exactly where we're meant to be," she replied, looking up at the man who had seen beyond her worn shoes to the woman beneath. "And that I wouldn't change a step of the path that brought me to you." In the years that followed, their love deepened as they built their life together. They expanded the farm, eventually buying the former Holloway land when it came up for auction. They welcomed 2 children, a son and a daughter, who grew up hearing the story of their mother's journey west and the shoes that carried her to their father. And in a special place in their home, displayed on a shelf crafted by Asher's hands, sat a pair of old, worn boots, a reminder that sometimes the most difficult paths lead to the most beautiful destinations.